Morning. Good morning. Good morning, Georgia. Good morning. Let's see who's going to join us this morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the broadcast. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Facebook. Good morning. Good morning. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey. Good morning. We are all things Georgia, talking Georgia politics, talking all things the ATL. Good morning, Robby.
Good morning, Miss Tamara. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I can't complain. Last week, my favorite.
There it is. There it is. Let's see where our other trusty co-host is, Mr. David Slavin. There he is. Happy New Year, David.
Hey, same to both of you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. It's good to see you.
We missed you last week, David. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Technological. This was a demonstration of my techno-ramus.
Well, tell us what's going on. We're going to start our broadcast off with you this morning. We're going to talk about what we should have talked about last week. So welcome to the broadcast, David.
Oh, you want me to start off now with?
Yeah, you have your lineup, right?
I was not ready to launch into this, but I will certainly.
19, David. Let's get this party started.
Okay, all right. Well, so my role in this little adventure that we're doing is to bring up the issues of acknowledge the divide, and one of the things I want to add to that is that once we acknowledge the divide, we have both a moral and material imperative to find ways to bridge the divide. So I want to add that into the mix, that we're not only are we here to acknowledge that there is racial inequality and segregation that's going on, but also that we have an obligation to figure out but with European American working people why and where their interests really lie and how they lie in solidarity. So how can I say this in another way? I can say that progressives in this country have created this notion of allies, that white people are going to be allies to black people. And I want to state right now that I am not an ally. I am not an ally. And I don't like that word. And I want to change that word, because there's an indigenous American movement that about 5 years ago out in New Mexico, Native American movement, that said, we don't want allies. We want accomplices. So what does it mean to be an accomplice to oppressed people? It's complicity is, to me, solidarity. All right. So that's what I'm looking for. That's a much stronger word than being an ally. An ally can be, you go out in front and I'll be behind you, right? Complicity and solidarity means I'm right there alongside you. And how do we do that? We really need to figure out ways to both act in solidarity and also to talk to for European Americans like myself, talk to other European Americans about the conflict in their interests as part of the white race, which are phony and counterfeit, and their interests as working people, which are real. And if you're talking about your interests as working people, you're talking about, solidarity, because that's the basis for working class having any power or any ability to survive, is that not only an injury to one is an injury to all, but that the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. We need each other. We need each other as human beings. And we also need each other as working people. So that's where I'm going with this. And one of the ways that I've thought of to make this happen, because we're always befuddled and stunned when we encounter racist remarks, for instance, from white working people, and we don't know what to do or what to say about it. And that's a.
It's okay. Keep going.
No, it's one of those robocalls. You know, I get them all the time. So anyway, one of the ways in which I think we can help each other as progressives, both black and white, is to bring up stories, and by that I mean anecdotes. I mean the stories of racial encounters that we face or we meet up with all the time. And in the course of telling those stories, I do not want to create a litany of sorrows and embarrassments and frustrations, all of which reinforce the sense of powerlessness. What I want us to do is to tell the stories and then think about how we would change the ending of those stories, how we would turn them from something that alienates us from not only from black and white, but from white working people from each other. You know, this emphasis on individualism, and turn them into something where we really are reaching out and giving each other support. And that lesson of solidarity on the tiny micro level of little anecdotes and individual, examples, I think is a way of both breaking through, unlearning what I call the learned powerlessness of of thinking and acting white, and at the same time, it's a way of reaching out both to each other as progressives, and also to hone our skills to create a toolbox of responses to white working people that, instead of pushing them away, will draw them in. And so that to me is that's a set of tactics that will, I think, lead to an overall strategy of bringing people together without them having to be disagreeable or powerless. So I don't know how much longer to continue on this, but I do have a story of my own that I could tell, and that I think is very much illustrative. It's a really good example of something that happened to me and something that I did. This happened many years ago when I was a blue collar worker in New York City. I was out looking for work. That time, in the 70s, you could just go out to factories in Long Island City, which is part of Queens. It's right across the river from Manhattan. And there were hundreds of factories that were in Long Island City. Now it's all condos, $1 million condos, but that's, another story. But at that time, you could just walk in off the street. And I was looking for a job, and I walked in off the street in a small factory that looked like what it was doing was it was making professional kitchen equipment, stainless steel sinks, and the bars, for bars, in bars and restaurants. And I walked in and I filled out the application, and I thought, wow, there are these skilled cabinet makers that are making these, these long 20, 30-foot long bars, out of wood, putting them together, polishing them, carving, and all of that stuff. And I thought that that's where I was going to work, be a kind of an apprentice in this. So the foreman looked at my application and he said, look, I want to tell you something. Most people start in this factory, they start at $1.60 an hour. I'm going to start you at $1.75, but don't tell anybody. It's just going to be our secret. All right. And at that point, I said, well, okay, I put down that I had a high school education. Maybe that was something that he was. So he said, okay, if you could start right now, I'm going to take you in the back and show you what to do. And he took me through this whole section where the woodworking was done into the back, which is where there were a whole bunch of other guys that were working, just crating up the stainless steel sinks. And he said, this is where you're going to work. And I was kind of disappointed and that I wasn't going to get to work on wood. And he introduced me to the lead guy, the lead worker in this back room, and he was Hispanic. And I looked around the room, and everybody else in the room was a young Hispanic male. And when that happened, I was woke enough to think, oh, okay, I get it. I see what's going on here. And in other words, he was telling me that because, or the way that I interpreted was that this was racial, that he was giving me, he was imposing on me, in fact, a racial privilege. And so the question then becomes, which I've asked people, okay, here's the setup. This is my story. And the question is, how would you change the ending of that story? And for me, one of the things that I've noticed, because I've talked to both community organizers and labor organizers about this, I've set up this problem for them, and asked them what they would do under the circumstances. And I talked to one community organizer who said, well, I'd go to the foreman and I'd say, this is unacceptable. And I asked her, well, what are you going to do about it? You're going to have an argument with the foreman about no, I do not want to be paid 15 cents, 20% more an hour than the other workers in the shop. What are you going to say? And she was kind of confused. She didn't really have an answer. And a labor organizer, a guy who had been in the union movement for 30 years. He was, at that time, he was retired. I don't know where he is now, but he said, well, I wouldn't say anything. I would just try to work, keep my nose down, work, be quiet, win the trust of the other workers around me before I said anything to them about this wage differential. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to point out that these are really two kind of archetypical responses to a situation like this. And I'm going to say both what I think is wrong with their responses and also what I did. So to tell you what I did, first off, so we cut to the chase, is very simple. As soon as we had a coffee break, I was working there for maybe an hour. I went up to the lead foreman, who was showing me the ropes, showing me how to use the nail gun to put together the pallets that these stainless steel sinks were going to be shipped in, and showing me around the shop and alerting me to the dangers. And he was probably the only one in the shop, in that back room of the shop that spoke English. And so when we stopped for a break, I immediately said to him, the foreman is paying me $1.75 an hour. I know that that's more.
You built solidarity with workers.
Yeah. And I said, I know that that's more than everybody else gets. And then I said in Spanish, which I don't know if my Spanish is correct, but I said, estoy listo. I am ready. Maybe Robby can help me with this. Estoy listo.
That's right.
Huh? That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
To ir al huelga por todos los trabajadores to get $1.75 an hour. That's what I said to him. And before I said that, he was telling the other workers in Spanish, that they were paying me. And these guys were really, really, really pissed off. And he said to me, look, this guy over here, he pointed to one guy, a young guy about probably, same age as me, maybe a little younger. He's been here for a year and he's still making $1.60 an hour.
And this is where I'm gonna let you stop right there, David, because we're gonna bring it full circle to building solidarity. Go ahead and wrap it up because we have a couple of we're gonna bring in.
All right. So that's what I said to after he told me this whole thing. And when I said that, the whole atmosphere in the room changed. Mm-hmm. That they understood that I was acting, that I was prepared to work with them. So to make a long story short, this is what, to wrap it up, here's what my thinking is. My thinking is that what the community organizer was trying to do was to have an argument with her boss as an individual to an individual. And that is a losing proposition for any worker. The strength of workers is collective, not individual. So that's
stay there with that thought. The strength of workers is collective and not individual. We're going to go into our next segment.
Well, wait a minute, Tamara. I have to finish this up. Okay, you got to give me another minute or so here before we get started.
You have 1 minute, David. We're on time limit.
I've been watching the time, and I haven't taken more than 12, 14 minutes now. But here's the thing: the labor organizer had also done something that I thought was fundamentally wrong. And that is that he was saying, keep your mouth shut for a couple of weeks until you win their trust, which is absurd because you're lying to them every minute that you keep this information from them. So withholding information is a big, big source of mistrust among workers. And not only was it a wrong way to proceed in terms of the trust among workers, because sharing information is crucial here. But the other thing is that for me as an individual, it made me beholden to the boss. I had a secret that I shared with him, which he could expose anytime he wanted. So it creates dependency of the individual worker on the boss. And that is something that I think is really misunderstood by a lot of people, including a guy who had spent 30 years in the labor movement. Is that when you're looking at privileges, at inequalities like this, they don't simply hurt the people who are getting the $1.60 an hour. They hurt the person who's getting the $1.75 because it puts them in a position of subordination and dependence on their boss. And so that's really crucial for us to have a conversation about how to build solidarity. The inequality doesn't simply hurt the person or the people who are in the subordinate position. It also makes the people who are in the privileged position relatively powerless compared to what they would be like, compared to what would happen if they simply said, they're paying me $1.75 and they're paying you $1.60, and that is not right, and it's not in my interest, because we could together probably get $2 an hour if we stuck together. So that's
so we'll come back to you, David, with building solidarity. I know that this topic is large. We won't be able to digest it all in one setting. That's why we
But the point is that if we start telling each other these stories, and not just among, European Americans, but across racial lines. If we start telling these stories, we're going to be able to bridge, not only acknowledge the divide and the inequality, but be able to find ways to bridge it. And the more that we are in conversation with each other about this, the more we are going to be prepared when we face these kind of racial encounters. What do you say to a racist joke or something like that?
We'll be back with you, David. We're going to put you in the office. We'll bring you back. Robby, we're going to bring in our two guests. We have Mr. Egberto Willies with Politics Done Right, who is a regular on this broadcast. Hey, Egberto, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. How are both of you doing? Hi, Tamara. Hi, Robby. Nice to be here.
Hey. Good morning. Good morning. And we're going to bring in Mr. Greg Williams to have a conversation with us. Good morning, Greg. Welcome.
Hey, good morning, Claire. How are you?
Great. How are you? Welcome.
Busy Friday.
Yes, it is. So I won't keep you gentlemen very long, but I wanted to invite you both to the broadcast. I have to tell a quick story about how I met Greg. Greg was actually a candidate for the state senate along the way as I was a candidate, and we met. And we are on different sides of the aisle, but Greg and I had a lot in common, and I think we had a lot of mutual respect for each other. So I wanted to have him come on this morning and talk with Egberto and share with me and Robby and our listening audience, and of course our other co-host David, share with us what you can about the government shutdown and the wall.
Excellent. How do you want to start this, Tamara?
Whoever wants to go first. I just want to eat my popcorn and listen.
Well, if we did alphabetical order, we got Williams and Willies, so that's pretty close. I
think you won, so go for it. Go for it, Greg.
Well, nobody wins in these government shutdowns. We've found that to be true every time there's a shutdown. The workers always get back pay. It ends up costing federal government even more money than they would normally make in wages. It causes disruptions in their lives. So it's irresponsible for Congress to allow this to happen. And I've said that every time there's been a shutdown, they cannot get their budget process right. They are held hostage by a few zealots in either party that will not allow it. And it's very frustrating because it can have a negative economic impact. And I'm in the banking industry, and there are several services that are shut down right now, specifically with the Federal Housing Authority, the FHA, as well as the IRS is not sending back 4506 transcript requests because they're shut down. So there's a huge broad impact or a very broad impact right now because of this shutdown. I'm not a fan of it. I think they need to compromise. If the Democrats do not want to use the term wall, then let's call it an enhanced southern border and give the funding to it. 80% of Americans agree that we need to have secure borders. Most people don't think we need a 40-foot concrete wall, though. So there's got to be a compromise. It's only a few $1 billion, and I hate saying only a few billion, but in the case of a federal government with a $4 trillion annual budget, it's a drop in the bucket, and they've got to figure out a way to have a compromise reached.
Okay, let me say something, Greg. First of all, everything that you said is correct. Unfortunately, however, you sounded like a position we would normally call a democratic position in what you're asking for. I think the problem right now is not the Congress, but Donald Trump. And what Donald Trump is really doing is he's held his own party hostage. We have to remember that the Republicans already passed bills that they supported that just needed his signature that would have kept the government open. But President Trump is a very, very strong leader for his party, and nobody wants to take the risk of bucking him. That becomes an imperial state, and in becoming an imperial state, it freezes a democracy. And we as a democracy can't move forward as long as he has the power that he has over the current party. Unfortunately, Donald Trump, while he has the power over the party, he doesn't have the moral standards or the intellect to do that, because as we know, there are a lot of issues with building a wall. If they were to concede building a wall, plants and insects and animals know no difference between borders. People who live on the border, I am here in Texas. If you go to McAllen, Brownsville, El Paso or all of these other cities, what you find is, number one, they are the safest cities around to lie to Americans and tell them that there are murderers and drugs coming over the border, when we know that the drugs that are hampering Americans come from China through the airports, when we know that the issues with regards to illegal immigration, or what I like to call undocumented immigration, is really not at the borders, but through the air and through the other ports of entries. And the most and largest part that we have with immigration is between Canada and the United States. A much longer border. Nobody talks about it. They speak about it just because of the nature of the people coming from the south as opposed to the people coming in from the north.
The biggest problem with illegal immigration is people overstaying their visas. That's
Absolutely.
a well-known fact. So,
yes.
But there are certainly thousands upon thousands of apprehensions at the border. We've had caravans coming here. We have what I consider, I don't know if it's an emergency, but we do have a crisis when we have tens of thousands of people making this dangerous migration from Central America and then creating a backlog in people that have applied for immigration the legal way. My wife is from Ecuador, and we applied and got her citizenship through the legal mechanism. She had to work at Publix for a year to establish her residency here, and now she's assistant branch manager at a bank. But we have gone through the machinations of the legal process. So
Absolutely.
I know
and
difficulty, but people like me
respect.
take umbrage to people trying to cut the line, and I'm not doing it in a racist or negative manner or of fear mongering. I'm doing it out of fairness.
I don't, first of all, when I'm speaking to Republicans, I do not, whether race is involved or not, I usually stay away from that subject on a personal basis because it gets us nowhere. So let me put it this way. You're correct. Your wife is from Ecuador, and she came over here and she did it the right way. I'm from Panama. I came over here the right way and I did it. Now here's my feeling, however. There's a rule between America and Cuba. Anybody who swam that channel and touched American soil became a legal resident of the United States. Okay. Yep. They did that. Now, when Benjamin Franklin, not Benjamin Franklin, but when the settlers came to America, and I know many of you don't like to go this far, they came here, they touched land, they stayed here because they had the impetus to get here, they stayed here. When they came here, they conquered. The people that are coming from the south and the north, they're coming out not to conquer, but they're coming out of getting a job. That is their goal. Now, I am more progressive than most people. What I really believe in is that if you are able to come to this country and land on this land, that you are ingenious enough to do it, then stay. Let's protect our borders. Let's secure our borders. But if somebody is smart enough to get over here and they're living a legal life, they're doing their jobs, let's find a way to legalize those people. I know it sounds a bit too liberal for you. I know that. But I'm saying we can find a compromise somewhere in there, because a country that was formed on taking somebody's land should not be so bold into treating people also trying to get here as some sort of illegals, but just people looking for the same opportunity the original settlers were trying to look for when they got here.
If I could step in, I'm with Egberto on this. I was born in the States, and my mother came here as a student. And my father's side is from Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is a territory, so they have a very unusual relationship with the United States. Which I'm born here. I'm American, and I say that proudly and with great affection, with all of the resources that I've been given as a woman in this country. And ironically, some of my family is actually from Ecuador as well, as your wife is, Mr. Williams. I just, from my perspective, I agree with Mr. Willies that we're on stolen land, and respectfully, when I drive around Atlanta and I'm in real estate, every city contract, everything that's being built in this city is being built by Latinos. And it's very obvious that they are not legal. I mean, they are truly not. And back to kind of what David was speaking about earlier, the people hiring people, for that matter, if on both sides, both of your perspectives, are complicit then. And these are city and county contracts. These are developers. These are construction. And I've seen whole entire crews of Latinos building city streets. See, and before it was Latinos who are coming in, and I used to work for the airlines, so I'm familiar with the process of them coming in on airplanes from Guatemala, et cetera. 150 people with, some people don't even speak English, and you can tell who's bringing them in to do our construction and our farming. And before it was Latinos, it was Black people, literally working for free with slave labor. That's how we built things. So in my opinion, what I'd like to see is a better system altogether, not where people are doing it the right way and suffering, and then people are doing it the quote unquote wrong way and being used and pitted against each other, but truly a new system, a radical, creative system, something to, again, tie it all together. Alexandria Cortez, we talked about her last time. She said if you shut down the government, Congress shouldn't take their salaries. And she's right. I agree with that woman. That is a creative, radical solution. How long can you live without your congressional salary, sir? And, I think you both have a point, but I'd like to see something totally new and revamped.
Well, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel necessarily with something radical. I do agree with AOC on that. I mean, yeah, the congressional members are making $174,000 a year, which puts them in the top 10% of income earners. And it would be nice for them to go without pay and have it not refundable. That might give them a little bit more of an impetus to get things done. I would love to see a broader guest worker program. You're right. We're having a lot of our farms that, frankly, it's a lot of Latino labor, and a lot of, especially in California and even in Georgia, some farms have a lot of fruit and vegetables laying on the vines because they've run out of labor. Now, that's also the sign of a hot economy. I have a lot of contacts in the Hispanic community, and they are busier than you can imagine. And they are not working at slave labor wages or anything like that. They're making good money. And frankly, when they're in this country, it's not my job to determine their legal status. So if somebody's a good worker, then they'll get a job on a project that I'm working on. The E-Verify system is another thing that's down right now due to the government shutdown, and that's one of the ways, when you referenced earlier about seeing Latinos on all these construction projects, that's one of the ways that they're supposed to verify the status. So going back to the shutdown, that's just another problem endemic with our government not doing its job.
Greg, I'd like to interrupt a while because you made a very important point in your statement. And it shows you how abstraction has led to the hypocrisy of our system. You pointed out something that is so true. You said you hire people, and it is not your job to really verify folks' citizenship. So what we have is a quasi-economy here. Where undocumented workers are allowed to come in to service people who really don't have to care about their level, their documentation or not. And you can be successful in having a train of people coming in. We have another group of private companies who kick them out. They make some money from kicking them out, and another flock comes in and you make some money from the efficient work and efficient labor that you make from them, and another private company kicks them out. Another private company holds them. What we have is an industrial complex that uses the undocumented workers as the raw material. And it is done in a what I call an antiseptic manner, so that it looks like it's moral. But what we have is a very immoral system. And if you take a look at it at the core, it is by design. Do you really think Trump wants to keep these people out? If he wants to keep these people out, we are a technological company. An E-Verify system is almost perfect. We could make sure there is zero employment for undocumented workers, in which case, if you believe in the capitalist system of supply and demand, then that would kill the demand. That will kill the demand. And given that the demand is killed, there will be no supply. So, this is a very simple manner made complicated just so that a group of small, private, wealthy plutocrats can actually make money. And that is what we've been trying to teach Americans all along. your party, and I don't want to, and I'm not talking about you as an individual, because we are all a part of a system. And because you are of one system and I have another system, most of us don't understand the analysis that goes in within the system. We're just protagonists within the system. But it's an evil system that uses the undocumented worker as raw material, just like we have an evil system that uses 80% of Americans as nothing more than peons at the 20% control.
And that is why I think we need to revolutionize.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think this does need to be radical. It does need to be reformed. Honestly, Ocasio's statement on not paying salaries for our senators and congressmen during shutdown is revolutionary. That is not minor at all. And to be blunt about it, we need, the old systems are no longer functioning. They are shadows of prior systems that were damaging for people.
Robby, can I interrupt you 1 second? Because you said an important point right there. The old systems, I think the reality is that the old systems are working as intended, right? And that is to keep a few empowered. And, the few empowered is not, and the reason I don't like to hit the racial thing is because I think the racial thing is, it is something that distracts us, right? Because most people that are affected by this system aren't nosotros los colores. It's not the colored folk. It's not the black folk. It's not the people of color that are most affected. It is my brothers and sisters in Appalachia. It is my brothers and sisters in the mountains. It is our brothers and sisters all over that are actually white that are screwed. And that's the reason I'm trying to, and I know Tamara, that has been Tamara's movement in her district as well, is we get everybody together and realize that the real demon is not us all, the different folks that have all these ideologies. The real demon is the system proper.
I just feel you're selling the land of opportunity a little bit short, because in my opinion and in my viewpoints, we do have upward mobility still in this country. My wife is a perfect example of that. Robby, you'll know this, and Egberto as well. People with degrees in countries, Ecuador, Panama, their degrees may be in business, management, computer science. Those degrees don't mean anything here. You'll have doctors and lawyers from Africa and India working as cashiers at Publix. You guys have seen that, right?
Yes,
so
sir.
My wife had to totally reinvent herself here. And like I said, she had a hairnet in her hair, serving yuppies in Virginia Highlands subs for about a year and a month, until she was able to demonstrate customer service experience and that she could run a cash box. Then she got a job as an assistant teller at BB&T, and then she's just moved up through the ranks to where she's an assistant operations manager. Her salary has gone up 7-fold, benefits, and she is from a very wealthy country, family in Ecuador. So she was not coming here and leaving some hovel. She was leaving, I'd call her an Ecuadorian princess, but a very well-to-do, well-established family to come here and make her stake in this land because she loved the country and the opportunity so much. I just use her as an example because I've lived with her for 10 years. So I kind of know her.
I know where you're coming from. I do. And this is with great respect and admiration for your wife and for you. I watch this a lot because I want to be careful on how I say this, because I want to make sure you understand that I respect where you're coming from and your wife and what she's
I have a thick skin. You can offend me all you want.
No. I don't want to actually. But I think the disconnect is that people like your wife, and my mother to a degree, even though my mom and dad hadn't graduated high school, come here with certain backgrounds. You mentioned your wife, highly educated. Clearly, her family has a work ethic. Clearly, she knows structure, organization. Probably came from a pretty stable family and background. And unfortunately, in the United States, what we have is subcultures, and this is where I'm going to disagree with you too, Egberto. I think there is a racial component here. We have subcultures who are Black, who have come out of complete instability, who have not been educated, purposely, who have lived in divested communities that have been ravaged by one thing after another. And their generational line brings in an entirely different product. And then when your wife comes in and competes with that, your wife is going to, of course she's going to soar, because look at the level that she's competing in. And that does bring up race. And I agree with you, Egberto, that we are all getting screwed to a degree, but there are different levels of getting screwed.
No, I really think
If I may answer that,
I can interject here. Hello, interject something at this point, if you don't mind, Egberto.
David, yeah, I don't mind, but before you come in, David, I do need to, I just need to answer Robby one thing, that to let her know that there isn't a disagreement that we have. I agree with you. The reason I said I don't bring race in is because there are other, I can find commonality in the way Black folk and Appalachians are treated, so that we can create a commonality among them, and then we fight against supremacy.
On that, I think you're totally right. Well,
here's the thing that I would suggest about how to square the circle of this thing about race and class, about exploitation and oppression, which are two really distinct, categories. And to understand that somebody can be both racially privileged and economically exploited.
Right.
Which is the situation that most European American working people find themselves in. And you can also be a person of a working person of color who is both exploited and, in terms of political and racially oppressed.
Right.
So there is an inequality there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about that within the working class, there is an inequality, but there is also a commonality. That is the common, exploitation and the concentration of wealth that the separate and unequal status makes us powerless to be able to respond to. All right. Now, when you have 12 million people living in this country who are undocumented, and you ratchet up the pressure on them, that is the political pressure on them, what you do is you send them, as they say, into the shadows, and you make it impossible for them to organize, to fight for their rights, both their rights as human beings and their rights as workers. Okay, and to some extent, the labor movement in this country, the unions, have gotten that, and they used to be opposed to undocumented workers. Now they're beginning to organize them in the last 5 or 10 years, because they realize how damaging it is to working class solidarity to have a bunch of people who are constantly looking over their shoulders at La Migra, or ICE. So Greg is absolutely right. There are people who come to this country by the tens of thousands who manage to find a way to rise in their status, but and to make a good life for themselves here. The fact of the matter is that those people, by their tens of thousands, are creating jobs for other people as well, whether they're legal or undocumented. They are doing that. But there are millions of people in this country, like an order of magnitude greater, who are living in a status which renders them unable to protect themselves and their children and protect their rights as human beings and their rights as workers.
David, there's something also that I think Americans, born Americans, that need to understand about people who make it here. People who make it here as well are the exception. I mean, the fact that they've made it here, the fact that they've picked up and moved on here shows that they, Greg, you earlier spoke about mobility. These are people that had mobility, whether it's mobility of character, mobility of income with the ability to come. They did something to get out of a situation. That type of mentality already prints success on you, because that means that you're a person who are going to leave a situation. There are some people who just live within a situation as if they don't have options. These people that come to this country, illegal or otherwise, they've shown one thing, that they have the character and the wherewithal to actually get here. And that's one of the reasons, if you mentioned what I mentioned earlier, is we should reward that. We should reward that. Wow, just like the pilgrims came here, they had the wherewithal to come here and stay. These other people are, yes, protect our borders. But if somebody's ingenious around to get around, hey, that person may just be ingenious to develop something as well.
And this
I also think that
David, let me jump in because we have a very tight broadcast this morning, and I know Greg has to go. Greg, I wanted to definitely invite you back to these kind of conversations. They are rich. We need to have them across the aisle. Like we get sometimes caught up in talking to those that think like us. That I really appreciate your perspective and your insight.
I'd love to get Egberto, David, and Tamara, and Ms. Caban on my podcast. I'm on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. I've been running a bipartisan missive the past couple years, and we've had a lot of agreement, some major policy disagreements, but the good thing is we have the same end goal, and that is improving the lives of people. I think we should look through the private sector to do that, and my liberal friends tend to think we should use the government to do it, but that's we have a good debate. So, Egberto, pleasure meeting you today, as well to you, Ms. Caban, Tamara, and also David. Thank you guys this morning.
Thank you.
Greg, look,
having you back.
I want to just tell Greg, one of the things I love is as having people on the other side who are willing to have a conversation and not shout and match you. So thank you for doing that. Yeah,
I didn't want to wake up the dogs, so that's why I refrained from shouting today.
Thank
All
you.
right, you get a great weekend, okay? And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you
Look
next
forward to having you back. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Egberto, I want to thank you for always being giving us a national perspective. Egberto is with Politics Done Right. If you have not checked out his broadcast, please do. He is out of Texas, but he is on fire all the time. So thank you, Egberto, for joining us this week on this broadcast. We look forward to having you back next week.
We'll be there.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. You too, Tamara.
Awesome. So I want to thank you. We have a very special guest joining us today. I am very excited about this man. He is running for the chair of the Georgia Democratic Party. So let's bring him into this broadcast. Daniel Blackman, how are you, sir?
Hey there, how are you?
Hey, good. Center yourself on the screen. You're over to the left a little bit. Can you move your camera?
How's this?
There you are. Yeah, perfect. Get yourself right in the middle of that block.
No problem. Well, I'm as close as in the middle as I think I can get. I'm working out of my home office today, so I'm excited to be here and happy to join the show.
Thank you for joining us. So you are running for the chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia. Tell us all about it.
Well, our former chairman, who has served for 2 consecutive terms, Mr. DeBose Porter, has announced that he's stepped down. And obviously, if you're a Democrat in the state of Georgia, we haven't gotten to where we wanted to be in the last 20 years, but we came very close. And I think we're all proud of how close we came. We're proud of the strides that we have made, proud of Lucy McBath and what she was able to do in the 6th. We're excited about different areas that like Newton County, Georgia, where they have done a tremendous job and working hard to work and change the way Democratic politics are seen and how they organize and manage their field operations on the ground. And, for me, it's just time for Democrats to be as strong and as focused and as committed outside of an election season as we are during an election season. I think a lot of the folks we depend on, we do a great job of targeting them. We saw the ground game that Stacey Abrams put together this year, and we were all excited. But I think that same energy and enthusiasm has to be consistent in 2019 and every year that there's not a Democrat on the ballot or that we don't have someone at the top of the ticket.
Awesome. Robby, have you met Daniel Blackman before? Or David, I don't believe you've met Daniel before, but I've known Daniel along the way from all 3 of my runs, and I can just tell you he's a man with integrity. I think he would serve this party well if he was the chair. I'm excited about his candidacy. I'm hopeful that those that are able to vote for him, because the Democrats in Georgia don't vote for you. So explain that process for those who are watching and may not understand that not everybody gets to vote you in.
Yeah, so you have to be a state committee member to be able to vote. So I'd love to say everyone out there that is registered to vote in Georgia, come out and vote for me. It's not how it works from a state party standpoint. So there's a space for what are called state committee members. Those include at-large members, individuals that have run in 2018. It's very specific as to the bylaws as to who can vote, who gets to vote, and how that process works. But if I could just touch on one thing real quick, one of the reasons why I think is very important for us to understand as Democrats is that we live in a state with 159 counties. So we've actually created a document that'll be released today. If you could see it, 28-page document called the 5 Georgias Plan. We don't only talk about Metro Atlanta and the successes we've had in the Metro Atlanta region, but we talk about the state of Georgia and the ills that we're facing in coastal Georgia, in rural Georgia, in North Georgia, in the mountainous area. I live in Forsyth County, Georgia. I was the first black person to ever run in Forsyth County. I was the first Democrat to run in 28 years. And we want a plan that's inclusive of the entire state. We want to be able to support folks in Lowndes County and in Savannah, but we also want to support Democrats in, Rabun County, Georgia, on the Georgia-Tennessee line, because they're left out of a lot of conversations. And to our immigrant friends, I heard the comment that was made earlier. I've been listening in, and I think it was a very spirited discussion. But Democrats just can't be on the front line of voter rights and education and, different areas that we know we should, from an integral standpoint, fight for and support. But Georgia is also one of 6 states that supports 287G, which is, in my opinion, is similar to Jim Crow era laws that gives law enforcement the ability to racially profile our Hispanic brothers and sisters. So Democrats around the state, we need a comprehensive plan, which we outline in our 5 Georgias plan, that talks about every issue Democrats should get involved with, that I think would not only bring the state together, but would allow some folks that have not been as active in our party to get back involved and to support the issues we should stand for, which includes criminal justice reform, healthcare expansion in Georgia, immigrant rights, fighting for the folks that we know we're expecting to vote for us in elections, especially going into 2020. But we can't limit ourselves to 2020. We've got to have a plan for before 2020 and well beyond that time period.
Awesome. Robby, do you have any questions, or you or David have any questions for Daniel? Like I said, I'm hopeful that he will be elected. If anybody's watching, spread the word. Daniel, like I said, is a man of integrity, and I believe he will definitely serve this party well.
I don't know that I have I guess I kind of sort of do have a question. I know Miss Tamara, and I trust Miss Tamara. And if Miss Tamara says that you're good, I know you're good. So in that sense, what I'm having trouble with, and I'm a lifetime Democrat, and I didn't vote in this Abrams election, and I had a real hard time about it. Mm-hmm. The reason I didn't vote is because, and I've never done that before. The reason I didn't vote is because I'm very, very disappointed in the Democratic leadership in Atlanta. I live in Atlanta. And all of my state reps and my city council, my at-large, and even, my mayor are all Democrats. And I live in an area that's on steroids for gentrification. Southwest Atlanta and the South Side, regional development. And to your point, what happens in Southwest Atlanta, which is the last in-town affordable quadrant as a region, is going to impact all of Georgia, including the South Side. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, and it would impact the North Side as well as the city. These folks have kind of just played it safe and made promises and never delivered. And every single one of those people, and I could name names if you wanted, campaigned with Abrams. So I was stuck with people who never delivered, who basically left Southwest Atlanta out to dry. And we're going to probably have 5 minutes of what's going on now in Atlanta, all saying, this is your lady. What was I going to do with that?
So I want to say personally that we failed you, me included. I think Democrats around the state do a great job of campaigning, but to the commitments we make to our people, I am very familiar with that area. I lived in Southwest Atlanta for the first 18 years of my time in Atlanta. I was recruited to go to Clark Atlanta University, so I went to school in the Atlanta University Center, lived in the Vine City area. have invested over there. I'm very familiar with the West Side Future Fund. And I'll say three things really quick. Number one, 1.9 million people in Georgia are living at or below the poverty line, 45 million in the United States. And we have not, from the federal level to the state level, done a good job with working families and our working poor, because we have, tried to make developments and actions that are counter to the types of policies we say we want to support. One thing that I have done, which I'm going to encourage the Democratic Party of Georgia to do, is to articulate the opportunity zone conversation more, because that was a bill. While I don't agree with President Trump's tax plan, Tim Scott out of South Carolina and Cory Booker came together to put together opportunity zone legislation that allowed the depressed communities to be rebuilt and revitalized. The challenge is the conversations at the table, because on the one end, it gives very wealthy people the opportunity to invest into our communities with no safeguards. One thing that I think we need to do is, with the city of Atlanta, for instance, we should go to Felicia Moore, who presides over Atlanta City Council, and we should say to Felicia Moore that we want 20, 30, 35, 40% of these developments to remain under some type of affordable housing covenant. Democrats, in my opinion, including the chair of the party, which would yield a lot of influence, we need to set an agenda by doing three things. Number one, creating pipelines between people like yourself and other grassroots leaders. Number two, we need to make sure that we're on local radio and not just mainstream media such as CNN, MSNBC, or even local affiliates in Atlanta. We need to start going into rural areas and going into our local newspapers and having conversations, quite frankly, on our college campuses. And then lastly, we need to stop assuming we know what people want by listening to understand and not to respond. I think too often Democrats go into a community or an area that they've only visited to knock on doors and to canvass, but they haven't sat down with folks and asked them implicitly, what is it that you want and how can we help? So for me, I think the Democratic Party has a lot of soul searching to do. I hate that we lost your vote. I am the chair of the Democratic Party's 7th congressional district. We lost the runoff election to a very bad Republican named Rob Woodall by only 411 votes that could have carried us into a runoff. I think the way we could have gotten that 411 votes, even though that was in Forsyth County, Georgia, and Gwinnett, is we could have done a better job of really speaking to the needs of the people. And there are a lot of folks that I know that are good Democrats, and they're nowhere near, voting for Republicans, but they've lost their faith and their confidence in the party that they say they support. So we have to repair that, and I think it begins at the top with the chairmanship, and it would be my responsibility, if I'm so privileged to be elected, to work all the way down with our leadership throughout the state, including our elected officials in the city of Atlanta.
I do have, I
wanted to ask something, Robby, if I might, about program for the Democrats. If you don't mind, just interjecting this point. I think that you mentioned 1.9 million Georgians live below the poverty line. I would say probably the majority of them are people of color.
That's right.
But there is a substantial number of those folks who are European American. And what I am wondering is, how can the Democratic Party take into consideration both the inequalities between Black and white working people, or poor folks, both the inequalities and also addressing the poverty and exploitation in a way that does not write those folks off. There's an assumption there that those folks are Republican, and I wonder, do you have both a sense that being
of course the case? If you go online to DPG, like Democratic Party of Georgia.vote, I outlined that in a blog where I talk about the disparities in Georgia. One of the things, directly to your point, sir, is since the recession, 79 Georgia counties have not recovered. 79 out of 159 counties. These are not all Black counties or all white counties. These are a combination of counties that have very diverse populations, poor whites, poor Blacks, poor Latinos, you name it. So one of the things that I think is incumbent upon us to do is we need to look at what counties like Cobb and Fulton and DeKalb have done that have gotten their worker percentages past 10% since the recession of 2008. We need to go into these counties. 79 counties also have hospitals without an OBGYN. So
Right.
we've got to start looking at what is it that's holding our poorest counties back. And when you look at a county like Burke County, Georgia, that has Plant Vocal right now, I ran for the Public Service Commission in 2014, and we have these counties that are poor and they're touting jobs, but the reality is we're not giving them economic ladders to get out of these levels of poverty. And that's why cities like Atlanta, while I love Atlanta, I admire a lot of the things, but Atlanta, as prominent and prosperous as it is, has the largest income inequality gap in the United States. And until we start addressing those issues, if that's happening in Atlanta, it's 1,000 times worse if you go down to Early County, Georgia, or if you go down to some of these other areas where poor people have been forgotten about. Democrat, Republican, independent, atheist, Christian, you name it. We've just left a lot of people out of the equation because we've forgotten that they're far. We've accepted the fact that they're too far outside of our metro regions to be concerned about, and we need to change that narrative.
Well, Daniel, give us the website so how people can read just your plan and follow you, and tell us how we can stay abreast. When is the election? Give us the details, Daniel.
The election is January 26th in the IBEW building. We're going to be out there as early as 9 o'clock in the morning. The vote takes place, to my knowledge, around 12 or 1 o'clock. You can go to dpg.vote. I have done some interviews with NPR. You can go online. You can listen. We have a really great article coming out in the next week or two by a very prominent national publication. I don't want to let the cat out the bag yet, but we're doing some really great things. And I would just encourage everyone to understand two things about me. Number one, regardless of if I win, which is what I'm in this race to do or not, I'm going to continue to fight for working families and for people like the young lady that mentioned her concern of not voting for Stacey. I'm going to continue to be out here. You know, regardless of the outcome of this race, it doesn't change my commitment to the people. Number two, I want everyone to know that not only can you go to dpg.vote, but you can communicate directly with me. You can see our full plan, which I've showed you earlier. It's 28 pages of everything from how we want to reach people to our field operations to what has worked and what has not worked and how we want to be more effective. And I would encourage everyone to reach out to as many people as possible. The AJC has not been as favorable to us. They have been very much supportive of our opposition. We have already seen state and national leadership supporting the person that I'm running against. And while we're appreciative that, you know, this is getting a lot of attention, we want it to be a fair democratic process. And all I would ask people is to read the plan. And anyone that wants to serve us, whether it's the people in Atlanta that the young lady told us about earlier, or it's the Democratic leadership, we need a vision. It's time out for voting for people because of their color or because they have a D or an R behind their name. They need to be able to clearly articulate what the plan is and how we're going to get there. That's what I hope to do if I'm elected on January 26th, and we'll continue to fight for it and support good people like the folks that support your show. So thank you. God bless you, and let's make 2019 as productive and effective as possible so that we can have a successful 2020.
Thank you, Daniel. Daniel.
Thank you.
Yeah, righteous work, man.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that was Daniel Blackman. We are glad that he was able to come on the broadcast and share.
Yeah, wow, Tamara, that's
Georgia.
He's really impressive. Yeah,
I met Daniel along the way a long time ago, and from the gate, I knew he was a great person, and I'm just so glad, and I'm hopeful that he will be in leadership. Because I'm gonna tell you, I'm not very happy with the Democratic Party, and I'm just being very honest. I invited Nikema Williams, which is the person that's running against him, to the broadcast. I sent her a friend request on social media. She has not responded. I sent her a message, an inbox message, asking her to come on and talk to our listening audience. She has not responded. And the third thing I did, just to make sure that I've covered all my bases, I sent her a direct email to her Senate office. Still no response. The fourth thing, let me bring this to light too. I have met her along the way, just like I know Daniel. I've met her along the way too. Nikema won't even speak to me. She'll look at me and she'll look past me as if I'm not even there. I don't know what that's all about. I can just tell you that the Democrats and the Democratic Party, we got some major issues. And I think as a leader, I didn't think those are great qualities. And I saw that a long time ago, and I invited her to the broadcast, no response. I've known Daniel for quite a long time, and I can just tell you, he is the man with the plan. He is the man that can move this party forward. He can bring us together as a people. And that's what we need as Democrats. We need no division. We need all of us, no matter the color of your skin, gender, sexuality, no matter who we are. Daniel could bring us together. So I'm telling you, he has to be the one at the top leading this party, because I'm going to tell you, I'm not very happy. I'm not very happy. That's my 2 cents. Robby, you want to jump in? I know you had a few words you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I wish Mr. Blackman was on here, because I want to kind of express the concern with APAB, Atlanta Planning Advisory Board. If he's still there, I'm not sure. And also this NPU system, because I think it's wreaking havoc. It's turned into campaign resources, basically. And we can get into it next week if he's coming back on.
Yeah, I'll ask Daniel to stick his head back in if he can, maybe for like 5 minutes. I know he's got a busy schedule, but whatever time we can give him, I definitely want to give it to him. And we can definitely talk about this next week, Robby. We got plenty of weeks to come.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually curious. It almost seems like that the larger players who really control Georgia have almost allowed like a kind of Democratic Black elite to run the city. And it's like, well, handle it the way that we want you to handle it, and you can stay in power, and that's only Atlanta. And it's almost as if they're set up to fail to a degree. Not to say that those elite politicians who are Democrats in Georgia or in Atlanta are not benefiting. And that brings me into what's happening in Atlanta. And I'm going to go down it real quick, and then we'll save it for next week. We had an administration who basically hired under the Reid administration someone who ran for mayor, and then they endorsed, I guess, our current mayor, and were given a city position. And that violates the city charter. And so now that person, it was former Councilman Kwanzaa Hall, has stepped down. It was a high salary at Invest Atlanta, I think $130,000. And it's so obvious, because he went from, and I actually know Kwanzaa personally. I like Kwanzaa as a person. I'm disappointed, but then again, it just seems like plain old politics. You helped me win, and so you got rewarded. At that time, Keisha was real head to head with Mary. And it was Kwanzaa who organized that I got to run with my sister, or I got to stand with my sister. Prior, his slogan was, I'm Kwanzaa for all of Atlanta. And I'm just putting this out there. I had people approach me, because like I said, I know Kwanzaa and I respect him, who said, how did he go from being Kwanzaa for all Atlanta to I got to stand with my sister? And what does that mean? Does that mean I got to stand with my sister because my sister's running against a white woman? And that kind of puts us all back to what you were saying, David, earlier. And I don't want to discount because nobody brought this up, the double whammies, but it does tie all together. We're divided, and it's an appearance of race, but there are multi-level privileges, and I don't want to discount that, because if you are a Black lesbian who's poor, you got the 3 whammies. And that's just the reality of it. And we tend to discount that, and that's real. And that's why we tend to infight amongst each other. And when we're pointing the fingers, the powers that be who are really running Georgia and giving, a piece of Atlanta to a privileged few are controlling it all. But so I'm grateful to have this conversation and but that's the kind of larger picture. And then just to put it out there for next week, right, here's a good example of the Democratic Party and what you're talking about, David. Georgia has the world's busiest airport. Georgia also has the world's largest airline. And not one Democrat or politician will speak against that airline, and they are non-unionized. They are non-unionized. They have a workforce of one department that's over 20,000 people, and those people have no protections. And when we brought up how people are getting to this country illegally, our airport, okay, that totally impacts, but not one Democratic person in Atlanta will say anything against that airline. And they've been trying to unionize for years. And those people have no bargaining ability. The only people at that airline that have bargaining ability are the pilots, who are predominantly male Caucasians. Everybody else below wing at the airport, subcontracted, pitiful wages and no protections.
Right, right.
So we'll have a robust conversation on next week with you, Robby. We're going to bring this. You'll be up at the top of the hour, so we'll bring it in and we'll bring it home. David, thank you for bringing us for making it to the broadcast today.
And let me just say that I'm inviting all of our listeners, participants, to tell their stories, bring their stories to our show, to write them in by email or put them on Facebook, and we will begin to have a conversation about these issues and ways in which we can both acknowledge and bridge the divide, and to learn from each other how to empower ourselves in through acts of solidarity, right? And that's not words, that means actions. How do we act so that we're actually working together and get holding, keeping getting each other's backs, keeping each other's backs. So I really want to invite people to think about and to tell their anecdotes and help us all together solve the issue of how to change these inequalities into solidarity.
Yeah, and we will be back. We went over our time today, but it was a lot of conversation. I'm glad that we were able to get some things out, and we will be back every Friday, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. right here on Tamara for Georgia. I am Tamara Johnson Shealey, all things Georgia politics, and making sure we hold people accountable. So thank you, Robby. Thank you, David. Next Friday, same time, same channel.
Thank you.